conversation for today. There's quite a lot happening at this time, and of course you saw yesterday one of our lead stories in the news was looking at intimate moments being caught on camera and the involvement of minors specifically. And so as we do many times on this show, we try to turn it into a teachable moment. Yeah. So this morning, parents, we have a conversation geared up with professional counselor Aimee Jex, who's here with us.
Good morning.
Good morning. And Aimee is taking on the challenge of giving us some tips as to how to talk to your teenagers about sex and sexuality. It's one that I know most parents don't feel comfortable talking about, or perhaps feel that they're covering the bases, and they're really not. So we're hoping that, Aimee, you'll be able to guide everyone in the right direction as to how to address this.
You know, I think that's where the mistake is. You said talk to your teens. Mm-hmm. It doesn't start there. You know, you have to start having the conversations about your body, about respect, about communication as soon as you can. Yeah. So if you start talking to your teen about sexuality, it's going to be harder. So what every parent should do is start talking about these things with children as young as possible. Another part, you talk about them as soon. What we're talking about right now is social media. So when you give them a phone or a tablet, how old are they now?
Very young.
When you give them a phone or a tablet, you have to talk about responsibility no matter how old they are. Because I have had parents talk to me about their 9-year-olds. I don't want my child to have Facebook because I know what they can see, or I know like who can contact them, and I'm not sure I want my child to have that. So I will not have my child have any like electronic device until he or she is 16. I'm like, that's not gonna happen.
Yeah.
And the thing is that is important to know is that children as young as standard 2, standard 3 are already talking about porn, are already talking about kissing, are already talking about all these things. And so it's important to not wait until they are teens.
Yeah.
Because a lot of this happens before.
There's some uncomfortable truths that I think we as a society need to accept. And I think one of it is, as you're saying right now, is the sexualization of our children. And while, okay, I can reflect on my years, you know, maybe up to standard 6, holding hands was intimacy. For some kids, it was kissing already. And if you go back further into time, it's probably less physical contact. But now what we're seeing is completely different. And it's technology, but it's also just a faster progression of the type of interaction that boys and girls would have. Talk to me about I know you can't talk about cases, but what can you tell us in terms of shedding the light on how serious the problem is?
It is a very serious issue when, like I said, you see sexting happening with primary school students. And it's not an issue particular to Belize because it happens more and more, like you said, with electronic devices. We see it a lot more in countries that have more access to electronics and so on. But in Belize, I can tell you, I have seen many cases of standard 6, standard 5, I think as young as standard 1, I think has been the youngest one that I have seen an issue of this nature. Of course, these are ones where the parents find out and they bring it. But if you have a child who uses a tablet, how do you know that that child is using it responsibly? And even when you are monitoring them or you are talking to them, remember their friends are talking to them as well. And friends will introduce these topics. I think as young as standard 3, as standard 2, we become curious, like you said, like you have little relationships when you're in primary school. Holding hands is a very intimate thing. And you go out for ice cream or someone buys you an Ideal. Do people still buy Ideals? No, they buy you a dollar juice now, I guess.
I don't know.
Yeah. But you know, these little things happen and it's a healthy part of growing up. But then as parents, we need to go in and talk to these children about what is expected, what is right. And one of the things that is very important is to not judge these children. Because we go in and we tell them that's not supposed to happen, you're not supposed to do that, but then you kind of close off the communication
Like saying you're too young to be talking or
Yes.
thinking about those things.
You won't have a boyfriend, or you can't be in a relationship until you're, you're 20, and then you close yourself off from that, and so the child will do what the child wants to do.
Now, sex is a topic that makes everybody uncomfortable. And the ages that you're talking about are very young ages. I want to go back to Marlene's point in terms of us as a society and where we are in terms of even speaking about sex in an honest space. Right now we're having problems even getting an HFLE manual into the schools. As a society, if I were to say that Belize isn't ready to have an honest conversation about sex and sexuality, would you agree with me?
I would agree with you. One of the things that we need to see is that when it comes to sex and sexuality, do adults feel ready enough to take on issues for themselves? And then how do we extend that to children? One of the things that I was very curious about is something like the HPV vaccine. It has always carried a stigma because it's a vaccine that prevents cervical cancer. Cervical cancer is considered, I think most people, when they see it, they know it's an STD. And so one of the stigmas that go along with that, I think I said that wrong.
It starts with with a virus.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's a virus, and it can prevent your child from having cervical cancer or from transmitting it. And so transmitting the virus. And so how do we as adults separate the STD from the medical benefits? And similarly, as you are saying, the HFLE class, how do we separate the developmental issue from religion or from the culture? Because religion is one of the main things that people will cling to when they say we can't talk about that. And because we are a conservative society. But in every society, conservative or not, a lot of these things happen. We have had rape, historically we have had incest, historically we have had pedophilia, and that goes on in every society. And so it's important to start taking that step and speaking about it. And yes, we have to get to there. I feel like whenever I go on media presentations, one of my main things is looking at a paradigm shift where we as a culture need to be more communicative and more open about all of these things.
I'm so glad you said some of these things, because I've always used the term, we're like pseudo prudes, you know? We pretend that we're so conservative, but if we just look at the facts of our society, if we look at how HIV is still a problem, which is unprotected sex, if we look at the fact that we still have so many people dying and being diagnosed with cervical cancer, which is linked to an STD, if we look at teenage pregnancy, which is still a problem that we persistently face, where I can't verify the numbers today, but at one point in time, it was 1 out of every 4 live births. We see the issue now with all the nudes that are taking place, and I use the very relevant example of our girls forum when the girls said, listen, miss, we're seeing nudes, you know, so frequently, multiple times for the week. And that was at high school level. So we pretend, we pull out our morality card to say, okay, I'm too uncomfortable to talk about it, so let's just talk about morality. But behind that, it is continuing to happen. We're not really that conservative.
Well, the thing we have to remember is we come from a logging Caribbean culture. So we had men sometimes having multiple families in different places. And so that was the first, it's not a paradox, it's it goes against each other, where you talk about having these family and these family values, but we had women out of wedlock, we had multiple families, and we had, don't marry that person because I hear your father has a family around that area. And so we grew up with these kinds of things, and you use the word pseudo prudes, which to break it down, pseudo is fake and prudish is very conservative. So when we look at these two aspects of it, we have to reconcile. And yes, we do use that morality card because we know we have this idea of what the right thing to do. And so it comes to us judging, and as parents or adults, how do we establish that communication? It's by asking and not judging, by having these open conversations, by being open. And so if you hear that your child has received one of these, like, what do you do? What do you say? Are you going to shut down your child and say something along the lines of, you can't do those kinds of things? And so instead of opening a conversation and saying, how do you get these? Like, what do you do? And who do you get these from? What do you think is the appropriate thing to do? What differentiates, I think, our culture is that we are still putting those rules in place about the laws regarding cyber or electronic communication. And so we can't go like what other places say and say it's illegal to do this or it's pedophilia to do that.
But before you get to the law itself, there's a cultural undercurrent. I can remember having a conversation yesterday, and a young man was saying, listen, generationally, to have a conversation, somebody who is in their 40s having a conversation with their 19-year-old, it's a very different place. I remember growing up, and Marlene was talking about the over-sexualization of our society, of our young people. I remember growing up, the most lewd song was a Mad Crabber song saying, flex time to have sex. Now, every other song has the explicit version of the female body part as an explicit song, as an explicit lyric in it. We're looking at a time where I can remember in my day, you would wait until somebody stole a video cassette from their mother or from their father, and it would all sneak into a room and always stick around it and watch that one little thing and it'd be over. Now every 5 minutes
it was like more likely part of like a mainstream movie where just one part of it was a sex scene or one part of it was...
No, I'm talking about actual iconography. But now every 5 minutes is on your phone. We're talking about a society where the third conversation for these young people, first is send me credit, and the second is send me a pic. A nude. So my question is, how do you make the generational conversation? Because we simply don't understand what that language is, because in our day it was completely different.
Yes. And the truth is, the generation coming will always be more aware of electronics than the previous generation. It's what you said, you used to help your parents with the VCR or with the TV. Now you have like 10-year-olds helping, adults like figure out a feature on the phone. And it's just how it is. They grew up with it. That's part of their lifestyle. It's coding. They already know it. We have to figure out what to do. And so this is part of their language growing up, and it's always going to be a catch up. And so what's important again with that is trying to be there with them. There will always be that generation issue, just as we had with our parents, because they had certain expectations, and we just saw from our peer group, because as you know, teenagers pay more attention to their friends than to their family members. And so
that's the scary part, because then if you don't give them the right information, then they get that information from their friends. But I want to step back a bit, because what Kevin is saying is important, and my question for me personally has always been, can you fight what is now normalized behavior? It appears to me, and I may be wrong, that this is simply status quo for teenagers, that I send nude pictures of myself as a part of a relationship, as a part of courting, and there seems to be no recognition of risk, or no analysis of risk, or no contemplation of consequences. And so when things go out of control, then a young person has to face this humiliation. So can you fight what seems to be a normalized behavior amongst young people?
Well, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to take on sexual exploitation, sexual abuse. We have all these movements about the role of women in society and things like that. So again, I go back to this is a paradigm shift where we take on responsibility, where we talk about choices, where we have these conversations and we put it out there that these are risks. Like I said, there is no legislation right now that we could say, you know what, if you have these pictures of a 15-year-old on your phone, you can go to court or you can be charged or you can be labeled as a sexual predator and that will follow you for the rest of your life. At this point, we don't have that to scare them straight, but we do have the opportunity to talk to our children. We do have the opportunity to teach them about proper choices. We do have the opportunity to tell them, well, not to tell them, to ask them, how do you think this will follow you? Because then this situation in particular will help to have children see how to make a different choice, how this could affect them. We have several situations with children in school, with teachers that happen in the schools, and so when we have these things, then the children can start seeing, or the teenagers can start seeing, that there are consequences that will affect them. And so it's important to have those conversations when they get an electronic device, when they go into high school, when you have that conversation about sex, not necessarily about sexual intercourse, but more about a relationship, about respecting yourself, about being the type of person who, if you make a mistake, figure out who you can go to. What's your support system? How can you address it? What can you change?
Now let's go back to some how-to tips, because I don't want to lose the opportunity. And you spoke of starting very soon, and I want to know how soon and what type of information. We always talk about age-appropriate information. What's the age that you start talking to them, and what do you say?
Well, you have to remember that there are some children who develop faster than others, some children who are more worldly than others. You can have a 10-year-old who still plays with toys or video games, and others who are very much into relationships and things like that. So it's important to start realizing what's appropriate to your child. And there's always a starting point where you can say, let's talk about your friends. What are you doing? What are your friends like? Do you like them? What do you like about them? Are they fun? How do they have fun? You know, and so you start off with those basic kinds of things. Just starting the conversation about who's around them. Do you have a lot of friends online? You know, it's the same thing as the stranger danger. Who are you talking about? Who are you talking to? And one of the things that I have talked to with younger children, maybe 11, 12, 13, this person contacted me on Facebook. I'm like, who is this person? Why are you contacting a stranger? Why are you saying hello to someone you don't know? But that is our social media culture. I want to have more friends, so whoever invites me, I will accept their friendship because it's one more than my friend or one more than I had yesterday. And so we accept these people that we have no grounding. So
stranger danger with online interaction.
So one of the things that as a parent, if you know that your child has social media or access to it, one of the most important things is talking about who are your friends. Do you know these people in real life? So you go down the list of friends. Who are these people? Are these people people you know? Where do you know this person? Do you know this person from school? Do you know this person? The thing is, there are many children, many teenagers who feel like outcasts, and they have a support system online. They have people from different parts of the country who they consider their friends, who they've never met. And so that has a danger in it as well.
One of the important things that we know about teaching children about their sexuality is having them properly name their body parts. Why is that so important? Why is it that your child should be seeing breast inside any other colloquial term, or vagina or penis? Why is that important?
Well, the thing is, it gives you power over your body. That's one of the main things that is with naming something. just like when we want to call something rape, just like when we call whatever we want to call, it gives us that empowerment to be able to say it. When you use the proper word, then it gives you a standard. It doesn't sexualize it, because very often, like if we use the word vagina, it is a neutral term, but depending on how old you are, you might call it like a special word, or when you get older, you get those words that go in songs, you know? So it has a connotation. So when we take away the connotations, it becomes something more stable, something more neutral, that I say, you know, I'm being serious about what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And that helps a lot.
You know, I sometimes wonder that when we think about having these conversations, I'm going to date myself right now, that we tend to have an idea in our head that we're dealing with the Huxtables.
Yes.
Bill Cosby kind of Huxtables, where everybody does
Yes, we
everything
all
they're
know
supposed to say.
Huxtables, yeah.
Yes. As opposed to looking at it for what it really is a real dysfunction. The average, I'm not saying average, there are lots of Belizean households which don't go by these rules. Sometimes the parents don't even have time to look at what the social media is. Sometimes the way they address each other, because I don't know if I'm right, but sexuality is learned.
Yes.
So I know what to do because I see the way my mother and my father interact, the way my cousins interact with each other, my peers interact with each other. Now, my thing is, how do you have that conversation when you might have your child and you might have all these wonderful conversations with them? But the nature of youth is that the last person you listen to, we were all youths, the last person you listen to, the last person you have a conversation with is your parents.
I think that's where it comes in, that you don't want to preach to your child. You want to listen to what your child has to say. One of the main reasons counseling works is because it gives the person a space to talk out loud. And very often, if you can provide that space to your child, you get to hear what your child is encountering in their day-to-day lives.
Yeah.
The younger you do that, a 5-minute conversation walking home together, a 5-minute conversation in the car,
At
that
a
will
meal.
give you at the mealtime. We don't all have meals together, but yes, those kinds of things, getting ready in the morning, to me would be hectic. But you know, when you're picking them up from school, or when you're getting home, or some people are morning people, so they can have that conversation in the morning. And so you take that chance and to hear what happened in each other's days, what was salient, what was important, what happened, and how can you troubleshoot something, how can you realize something.
Have you seen these memes on social media of an entire family sitting around the table and all of them on a tablet? That is the way people are communicating now.
Yes.
And part of the problem that we're having is that the way we communicate, rather than telling somebody we like them anymore, we send them a social media. It's the equivalent now of the little note, tell me if you like me,
Yes.
circle yes or no. But the problem with social media is that it unveils a lot of stuff, because images, for example, I put up pictures every day. So there's nothing special now about, first I only saw you at 3:15 after school. Now I see you every 5 minutes because I look at your picture.
Yeah.
Surely the time frames and natural relationships are distorted by social media.
That's a cultural thing where we have this need for instant gratification, where if you don't tell me that you can send me a nude right now, I can ask 10 other people, and one of them will send me, or 3 of them will send me. And so we have no idea of what is happening on the other side. And that personalization of that conversation does help. And one of the things I would like to mention as well is that when you do take the time as a parent to sit down and have a conversation with your child, it kind of sets a precedent of what is good in a relationship. Because then if a child sees that their parents are not communicating properly, they do see that and they do take that on. Some children will say, this is what I like, and some children just grow up with that. I think that's one of the things that we have to realize. Yes, we do learn by what we see. Sometimes we learn from our peers, sometimes we learn from our parents, but that type of communication, expectation from relationships, those are things we do grow up with.
And I think the picture that Kevin painted is very real.
Yes.
But my thing is that no parent wants to have a teenager be a parent. They don't want to deal with a teenage pregnancy, and they don't want to be coaxing them or carrying them through the humiliation of a nude picture being released. So what we're talking about is more prevention. How do you get your child to make better decisions? And this is where I'm confused, because youth by nature, we blame everything on our youth, because we make irrational decisions. We don't think things through properly. When you're young, especially, the issue of consequences, that's a last thought. And I know that's basic development, right?
Yes, that's part of the brain, and
yeah.
it's not at a place where you stop.
Yeah, so your brain isn't fully mature enough to realize, okay, if I do this, I might have to face consequences later. So how do you get them to think of these consequences? Because these, whether it is unprotected sex that leads to teenage pregnancy, whether it is engaging in early sexual activity, whether it is recording sexual activity, or simply just taking a picture of a body part, how do you get them to think of consequences when naturally they're not inclined to?
I go back to communication.
It is. Yeah.
But one of the things that I like that you pointed out is that these consequences we are seeing now, and children learn by what they see outside. So bringing these instances into the conversation. And so even if you don't talk to them about making a better choice, you say, if your friend Jean was in this situation, what do you think she could do? So that could be part of the conversation as well. Then rather than address choices that your child is making, you put it as a general, or you say, I heard this happened to your friend, and you talk about that situation. One of the things that I was thinking was that many times we talk about other people, we call it gossip, but sometimes it helps us to discuss or bring to the limelight things that we are doing. When we are talking about suicide, when we are talking about depression, it's always easier to talk about someone else. And similarly, when we are talking about social media or sexuality, we can be talking about someone else as well, because it's by example that children learn. We have these conversations, we know what the consequences are, and that will help them to see what consequences are possible from this choice. And so when you lay out a scenario and you talk about different choices and you have that conversation, then they have choices. It's like when you have a 4-year-old, you don't tell them, what do you want to wear today? Just go pick something. You tell them, do you want this outfit or that outfit? And so you want to limit their choices. So it's the same thing with teenagers. When you have that conversation, you talk about what choices are possible, and you talk about consequences, and the more you have those conversations, the more prepared they are when they do encounter these. One of the things I did want to talk about, you keep bringing up embarrassing.
Yeah.
And this is something that has to go with this shift as well, because a lot of these things we have to realize are not embarrassing. Your body is not embarrassing. If you took a photo, and that is a challenge that I have with several of the, particularly girls, and even some boys that I've worked with who have had nudes out there, they are embarrassed by it. And one of the things is that then you think everyone is judging you. You believe, you start getting paranoid, and you have to start understanding that once there has a mistake has been made, how can we deal with the consequences?
Yeah, but Aimee, I mean, it's real. It's the way we have seen people react to just about every video or photo that has been released. People completely tear you apart. And it's devastating to watch as an outsider. I can't imagine being the person themselves. So I hear what you're saying. I would love where we could celebrate or embrace the fact that we all have our own individual sexuality, but quite frankly, society isn't there yet.
Again, here is a double standard. It's okay to take a photo in a very skimpy outfit and put it out there. But if you take a sensual photo that you don't have any clothes on, it's considered a nude, and you put that out there and you were okay taking both. I'm doing this in a scenario where you posed for both of them. Why is there embarrassment in one and not the other? And these are things that we have to start addressing. You chose to do it. Now, the person who put it out there, because you sent it to one particular person, I'm not condoning this behavior. I'm not saying that it's appropriate. But when it comes to you chose to do it and you trusted the person, why should you be embarrassed rather than be angry at that person?
You become embarrassed because of the reaction of people. That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying that there is a misplaced emotion. There's a real emotion. I imagine there's anger over the person who posted, but there is also facing the backlash of where society is. And again, it goes back to what I've said very early in the show. We pull our morality card when we feel uncomfortable, and it makes us uncomfortable. And I'm not saying that's right. I'm not saying that that's where we should be, but that is where we are.
And that is, I think, the main conversation to have with any teenager, with any person with an electronic device. What you put out electronically can be permanent. And it can follow you late into your life. It can affect you at any point in your life. And that is one of the main things that we have to realize. I remember when I was asked to do the weather. And several people came to me and said, are you sure you want to do that? Do you know the comments they talk about the people on TV? They call them fat, they call them ugly, they tell them about their greasy face, they tell them about all of these things. And I said, oh, I didn't realize that. And what we have to start realizing is that once you are out there, people will talk about you. They talk about you if you are in your class and someone realizes that you are of importance. They will talk about you in your neighborhood. They will talk about you in several media. And putting this out on that platform, you have to realize that anything you put electronically, either positive or negative, is how you will be seen forever.
You know, we're talking about having a conversation with your teens, but the conversation should really start between the adults.
Yes.
And that's a huge problem, because two people in a relationship, they talk about bills, they talk about plans. One of the last things, one of the few things, even in healthy relationships, that people talk about is sex.
Yes.
So they're not even able to talk to someone that they should be very comfortable with talking and probably doing. Now to translate that to talking to a child. So how do I start that relationship? How do I start that conversation with my partner?
This is one of the toughest things as adults. If you have had more than one sexual partner, how many of those relationships, how many times did you talk about sex beforehand? How many times did you talk about condoms? How many times did you talk about birth control? You know, these are things that are inherent in a relationship. What if I want to have a child and I don't want to use any birth control? Are you okay with that?
But why go to some of the safe examples? Because those are some of the safest examples. Contraceptives is a safe conversation.
It's actually not. If contraceptives were a safe conversation, we wouldn't have these HIV numbers and STDs and things like that.
I'm talking about going even further.
About preferences and likes and dislikes.
What do you enjoy? What makes you comfortable?
What do you want to do? Yeah.
Correct. What I'm talking about, those conversations, not whether or not we're going to use a condom is a pretty mundane conversation. And yet I'm talking about getting into the deeper part of understanding intimacy, and understanding who your partner is and building that relationship, because it's the same thing you will do with the child.
Yes.
No different.
To challenge that, again, I've had these conversations with clients and they have no idea how to start that conversation. So one thing to do is to start, and then they come back and they say, I brought it up and my partner kind of ignored me. And these are things that it goes back to our culture or what we expect. And you will find that the more comfortable the more you have these conversations, the more comfortable you are, the more empowered you are. When you talk about yourself, I think we tend to not personalize things. So we will talk, to your teenage person, you better not bring no baby into this house because we don't have time for that. We don't have the money for that. And you better graduate from sixth form at least. So we have that conversation rather than...
And that's what I'm talking about, because the adult version of that conversation, no bring no baby, is don't touch me tonight because I'm tired.
Yep.
So we're unable to communicate on safe grounds. And because people you don't somehow communicate with me different than you do your boss. You probably restrain it a little, but the trajectory is still the same. And so to me, the overall conversation has to be about how we communicate with each other and get to real issues.
Yes. You have to be open to it and you have to put yourself out there. And then you have to see how your partner responds. Sometimes your partner isn't ready, but you still have to push the issue. One of the things I always say is come back to the conversation a day later or 2 days later and see if that person responds. Now, these are things that should be happening since we are in courtship, but we don't talk about those things. And when you have had 10 years of relationship and all of a sudden you want to start talking about what you like and what I do and what is wrong, it's kind of difficult to say. Let's say you are 40 years old and you've like a 40-year-old woman and you have never had an orgasm and you don't know what it is, but you see all of this on the media. How do you talk to your partner about it? It's not something that is talked about, that is expected, and so you have to talk about it in the relationship.
To talk about it.
In the relationship when you are in a long-term relationship. And so when we have these conversations, it's a new start for someone. It's like it's starting a new language, and it's true. Having that language is something that we learn eventually. It's just like learning another language. We don't have it. We have to learn the affection. We have to learn the words. We have to learn all these areas that are part of the relationship. And yes.
No, I was just going to say it because I'm reflecting, and I don't want to miss the opportunity to talk about the good work that the BFLA does, because they promote sexual and reproductive health rights, which comes with education, which a lot of times people are misinformed to believe it's telling people how to have sex, but really it teaches you how to have conversations like this, and decision-making skills. And decision-making skills is as important as having the conversation in how to negotiate, whether it's condom use, because you're right, young people still don't use condoms, talking about STDs, STIs, and whether or not I even want to have sex if I'm not ready and I'm in a relationship. If I have never been exposed as a parent, and I think that's a fair judgment. So I grew up, I have a teenager, my mother didn't tell me anything, I figured it all out along the way. I don't even know if what I'm doing is the right way to do it, And now I have to talk to my teenage boy or teenage girl about this. Give me some tips as to where I can start. Tell me, okay, so this video is out and I want my little girl to know initiation, or the age of first sexual encounter is between 14 and 16 in Belize for boys and girls. So that's the window you're looking at. So let's say my girl is 14 years old and I am just thinking, I do not want her to end up in a situation like this. What do I say to her? How do I start? I don't know how to talk about this, but I'm watching Open Your Eyes saying, Miss Aimee, tell me how to do it.
One of the first things to talk is about what is happening in the news. So what is happening in the news with this situation. What do you think about it? That's a good conversation starter. Just what do you think about it?
Okay.
Has that happened to you or to anyone you know? One of the things, if you really want to know as a parent if your child is engaging in these, is just asking point blank. Even if it makes you feel uncomfortable or awkward.
Like asking them if they're having sex?
No.
Or asking them if they're sending
about
nudes?
The nudes. You could say, have you sent or received any photos of someone naked? Is that someone that you know in real life, or is it a celebrity, or is it someone on the media? Do you know that person? And so these are two places to start. You can just start about what is in the news and having a conversation about the news. So with that, you just start a conversation, and where it goes, we can imagine.
Now, I'm trying to be that parent now, right? How do I not preach? How do I not say, listen, you see what happened to that girl? This is why you can't send your naked pictures to anybody. This is why you shouldn't be engaging in any kind of sexual activity. You know, how do I, because it's natural. You want to protect them, and I think protecting them comes with the only way we've been taught to parent, which is preach.
Or lush.
Yes.
Yeah, or, well,
Parents do that still. And the thing is, when you start with a question, you kind of hold your judgment back. And so that will help you to not preach, to just start asking a question and asking, what do they think of that situation? And if you ask, have you ever encountered it? And that is when your strength as a parent has to be the strongest, because you have to start deciding to make that choice to not preach. Because what I find with teenagers is that as soon as they are being preached to, what happens?
shut down.
Exactly. And you have to be aware of that as a parent, that if you start preaching, your child will likely not listen to what you have to say. And so that asking questions is important. Not judging is very important.
Yeah.
Asking about choices. And like I said, when you talk about choices beforehand, the child is more equipped to make better choices when they are in that situation.
So let me give you the scenario then that I say as this 14-year-old, because we never say us, we say my friend, right? Well, my friend do it. And you have to swallow that as a parent. Or maybe the child is bold enough to say, yeah, well, you know, some boys send me some stuff or they ask me. What do you teach them from that point?
That is hard as a parent.
Yeah.
You have to then say, what is the right thing to do about this situation? What do you think this will lead to?
Yeah.
What are the consequences of this? And then you ask them again, and you keep asking. Whenever you have a conversation, is to ask and to listen. And one of the things I want to say, that as a parent, it's important to have the child think that they are introducing the option. Because if it comes from them, it's something that they came up with. And if you see that they're not coming up with something, you can offer a couple of choices.
Yeah.
So would you delete those photos? I never thought of it. Why do you think it's important to delete it?
Or would you send?
Or if you forward that picture of your classmate, isn't that bullying? Aren't you taking advantage of that person? Aren't you doing something to hurt that person against his or her will? And so we don't have these conversations, that even something like that is considered mean and it's teasing.
Well, that was really going to be my final question. I know you have something else to ask, but just let me close off with this. One of the things that I really would want to ask you as to how to talk to a young person. And you're right, if the young person is watching the news and they see this, and how do you teach them to develop empathy? Because if we really want that society where a person doesn't feel embarrassed about what is their body, it starts with empathy. And how do you teach your teenager to recognize what that person may be feeling?
These are two separate issues, because one is recognizing yourself as an individual, learning to make good or choices that you like, choices that will help you along your life. So how to get a teenager who has their brain development hasn't gotten to a mature level yet to stop and decide and say, I will make a good choice here and delete this photo, or I will make a good choice and not forward this, or I will make a good choice and not be mean to this person. Again, these things go back to, who am I? Do I like who I am? Am I strong enough to stand by my morality, to use that word? And then the other one is the empathy is something a little bit separate, where you start understanding. Of course, it comes understanding who you are, that you start to understand what someone else can be going through. What if it were to happen to you? Would you like that? And then we can start addressing so many other things about how we gossip, how we get conversations around in school, how we talk about in our workplace. Do we use respectful words with each other? Do we call each other things that is okay on the street, or you know? And so we have to change our language when we introduce these things about empathy and self-awareness. So when we have these things, you have a child who, let's say, is 5 or 6, and you say, oh, that child has a mind of his own, you know, always making these decisions. Do you empower that child, or do you tell that child, you know what, you can't do that anymore? And so to me, it starts from a young age, so that by the time they do get to the age of making sexual decisions, which you put it at around 14, but I believe that these ages are much younger now, because honestly, I believe that sending a nude is a sexual decision. True. And if that happens at age 10, then you have to have these conversations before age 10, because if you have the conversation after the child has had sex, or after the child has been kissing someone, or after the child is meeting up a stranger, then it comes to consequences like lashing and, you know, just preaching, because then the child made a decision. But if a child made a decision based on the information that they had, so like if I'm talking to my friends and my friends are sending these things, and I've never had a conversation about this with my parent, then I am making the decision with as much information as I have. Yeah. You know, and that is something you have to realize, that you always have to give a little bit more information, always being age appropriate. So when we talk about body parts, you teach it to a child as young as 3, 4, 5 years old. And so when you talk about respecting someone's body, you tell them you can't go around hugging people. You have to, you know, ask them or read the situation, because there are some young children who just go and hug people and grab people when the time is inappropriate. And so you have to have those conversations about appropriate touch at a younger age. And those two same conversations, as they get older, get carried out to what is the nature of your relationship with your boyfriend, what kinds of behaviors are you engaging in, you know, and what is appropriate for this age.
My final question is really, are we underestimating the power of what sex is? Because sexual interest and your sexual drive is a natural, healthy thing.
Of course.
It's probably more powerful than food sometimes. And the problem that we're having is what it means. What it means to have sex now is just probably like equivalent of a hug back in 1920. And my focal point is really to get parents and teens to understand the weapon of mass destruction that they have here, which can actually either make or break you. Because a teen has no interest in consequences. When I was a teen, you told me,
they can't.
And that's why you have so many tattoos. You can go there, and tattoos are the equivalent of sexting. Because you're going to have that tattoo that your friend in the basement so it's going to look just like Tupac's and doesn't look anything like it. So my thing is to get them to the wider conversation and not to go straight in to talk about sex itself, but to have other conversation about what value and meaning is. So it's not just a conversation about sex, it's a conversation about what I mean and what the value of my image and my worth is.
Yeah.
And I think that is an easier conversation.
Yeah. It's not easier, it's a different it's a root of that conversation. But I don't know if it's an easier conversation, because you find a lot of parents out there who became parents and they were not ready, and they did not have an appropriate self-worth, where they did not value themselves for who they are.
If I ask 10 out of 10 people, 9 out of 10 people, if they prefer a conversation about worth with their child or a conversation about sex, how many do you think would tell me they prefer one about sex?
I think many parents, not I'm ignoring you, will not know how to start either conversation. Because when you talk about self-worth, those are little things that I'm saying you want to start as a child. Who are you? How do you value? What are you doing for each other and things like that? That's how empathy comes up, because it comes out of that conversation with worth. And so sexuality is part of that. And so they do come part and parcel, because they go together, where sexuality becomes a stage in the development around early teens or tweens at this point. Yeah. So that's just part of that same conversation. So yes, that conversation about worth is very important. And that conversation about worth and who you are starts off with just a general conversation.
And you know what do you like? You know what I say that too, to close off? Because we've been talking about sexuality and sex. But there's a completely different conversation which has to be had, which is sexual orientation. And it's completely different from sexuality.
Of course.
And you can't even get there if you don't start the worth conversation.
Yes.
And I'm pretty confident that worth conversation is easier to start and would be one to start quicker and earlier, and that is why
I would have
when
to,
you deal with
I would have to disagree
that
with
is
you.
That is why when you start off the conversation, as you've been saying, with the first sexual conversation is really good touch, bad touch, and that is a conversation of worth. Nobody should be touching you here, and so the first conversation you have of sexuality is a worth conversation, and so it's a matter of building on that conversation to get you to understand self-worth.
Yes.
Okay.
I think you summarized everything I was trying to say with the appropriate words, since my brain doesn't work too early before.
All right, that was a whole other level, but I'm not gonna go there now, because we do have the rest of the show to go through. Thank you so much, Aimee, for coming in. We know it's a tough conversation. We know people shy away from it, and the more tools we can give them, the more parents will feel equipped to at least try. So thank you. We're going to go ahead and take a break, and when we come back, we'll be talking to Galen University, so stay tuned.